Hi, my name's Eric Kasloff. I'm a filmmaker, and each week me and my best friend Larry Sands, who's also a filmmaker, sit down and have virtual lunch with up and coming people in the film industry, established people in the film industry. We talk about how they started, where they're at, and more importantly, where they want to be. This week, we are having lunch with Nicolas Curcio. All right, so Nick, I discovered you on TikTok because the thing I love about filmmaking overall, especially screenwriting, is, and I want to get your thoughts. To me, screenwriting is 49% creativity and 51% engineering. What are your thoughts on that?
That is interesting. I've never heard anybody break it down with the numbers like that, but I think it's true. Yeah, no, it's you've probably heard me on TikTok talk about like the math of screenwriting, and it's something that I kind of refer to a lot, and a lot of people ask me about that. But you're right. It's absolutely engineering. There is I also write books, and I think when you write a book, you're kind of just going, and it's very loose. And screenplays, even though ironically I talk about like how you don't have to follow the rules of screenplays, at the end of the day, movies, there is a math to them, at least in terms of commercial studio films, that, like books, you're going to have so much of a range, whereas like most movies, generally, you're going to be between like 90 and 120 pages. Like there's just a lot more math. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with that breakdown.
Right. And first, now the next question, what are you snacking on or having for lunch today?
So my lunch today, and this is usually what I eat for lunch. I probably need to eat better lunches, but I always have a string cheese. I'm a huge fan
Nice.
of string cheese because it's very fast on the go. And then I've got an apple. I kind of do like, a mini lunch, and then I do a bigger, uh, another kind of snack lunch later. But yeah, how about you guys?
Very cool. I
Larry, what are
have,
you having?
yes, I have some baked chicken that I'm
Oh,
gonna be eating along with a yogurt.
okay.
So
I
Nice.
am
yeah.
having a tri-state area standard, and that is a Reuben sandwich. If you don't know what that is, it is pastrami on rye bread with sauerkraut and Russian dressing.
That's cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So actually, Nicholas, I wanted to talk to you because I think a lot now has to do with social media and how you get out. And it's interesting that Eric, you saw or you got to know Nicholas through his TikTok. Um, and I think, you know, the world of entertainment and acting and filmmaking, more specifically, has changed in that it used to be, um, back in the old days, in the 2000s, early 2000s, um, as an actor, because that's how I started out, obviously. But, you'd send in a headshot and you'd mail it in, and then it went from mail to you could email people, right? To now, there's social media. And how easy or how hard is that for you to add into your daily writing life as a screenwriter, as an author? How difficult or how easy is it to now be I'm kind of like Eric. I don't like the word content creator because it is what it is. But
Mhm.
but being a content creator for TikTok, what's that like for you? Because that's a really fascinating insight for me.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I've been talking to people about this a lot, because yeah, so there's a couple of parts there. So first of all, and this all kind of ties into the reason why I'm doing it. So during the writer's strike,
Hmm.
um, for years I've been like browsing TikTok, but I wasn't necessarily always posting on TikTok.
Mhm.
And during the writer's strike, I had this moment in time where I was a part of a thing that everybody was talking about on TikTok. But the thing was that I kind of noticed was there weren't really any writers on strike talking about it on TikTok. There were people covering it as news, like entertainment,
Right, right.
digital creator type people. So that was the first time where I ever got on TikTok and was like, "Hey, y'all been hearing about the writer's strike? Like, I'm actually on strike." And there was a lot of, a lot of things that were going viral were like negative. Like there was a couple content creators that were like, "Hey, studios, I'll work for you now that the writers are on strike. Like, I
Right.
don't care about scabbing." And just stuff like that. So originally I kind of hopped in to be like, hey, like guy who's actually on strike here, here's what's going on. Like I'm a part of this guild, I'm picketing, blah, blah, blah. And but in general, another reason I wanted to do it is because it's kind of the same way about screenwriting. Like there are a lot of people who talk about writing and screenwriting on the app, but there weren't a lot of people who I felt like were had like the professional experience to do it. And that's
Right.
not to say that I'm like super experienced. Like I
Yeah.
do feel like I have a window into like what it's like right now to break in and like get managers and agents and like work on a couple studio projects.
Mhm.
But ironically, a lot of the people who have more experience, um, a lot of them, like are speaking to just a different time where things were very different
Right.
in the industry. And so, yeah, that was all kind of a big reason why I wanted to get on and do what I do. And a lot of other writers have talked to me and said, "Oh, I really like your videos. You inspire me, and I want to put my face out there now because it's rare for
Yeah.
writers to put their face out and kind of talk about the process and stuff." But yeah, some people have been like, is it embarrassing for you, or was it embarrassing for you to like take on the role? And were you scared people weren't going to take you seriously? And it's like, well, I think when you think of content creators or influencers, if you will, which when I go to events now, I'm an influencer.
Nice.
Um, a lot of people like I don't know, my content, if you will, it's like usually educational. Like I love talking about movies that I like. I try to keep it positive, but so much of what I'm talking is just like trying to tell you stories about the industry, answering people's questions, giving advice. So it's always been kind of based in education for me. And so yeah, I have always had like really positive, comments, people from film school saying, I really like your stuff. So I think it's a little different for me because yeah, I'm not doing your typical influencer stuff. Like I'll still make goofy videos and jokes and stuff like that. But for the most part, yeah, I'm kind of just, and in terms of what you asked about the time, being a writer is kind of a lucky job where I'm just at home all the time. This is the same desk where I write usually if I can drag myself out of bed to actually write at my desk. Um, but yeah, I kind of just, that's another reason I love TikTok is such a low barrier to entry. Like YouTube, you kind of have to be a one man or one person studio
Yeah.
and you have to make you have more production value, right? But on
Right.
TikTok, you don't even like I have all my nice mics and stuff now, but often I just kind of turn the camera on and just talk and I don't really script anything. I kind of just talk at the I usually have like an idea of like, oh, I should make a TikTok about pitching or I should make a TikTok about why I like to always say positive things instead of like negative things. It's
Yeah.
because usually when I talk about movies, those get sent to the people who like make those movies and then I have to meet them and I don't want to have awkward
Wow.
conversations,
Yeah.
all that
I
kind of
gotta
stuff.
cut you
But
off on that. That's one thing I've learned. As soon as you start getting stuff made, you can't talk bad about movies and directors because someone is gonna work for them or you're gonna meet them. It's like there's this one guy, I'm not gonna say the off mic, I'll tell you about it.
okay.
I watch his movies on Tubi just to make myself feel better. It's like, oh man, I'm so much. I mean, I'm not that great, but I'm better than this. But a good friend of mine and Larry, who was on the show, was excited about being in this person's movie.
Mm.
Now, if I go on my Facebook and put blah 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 movie is horrible, I watch it to feel better about myself, I look like the a-hole right there. So it's good that you do that, because it's easy. And let's be honest, there's more money in being negative about movies than there is being
Yeah.
positive
Mhm.
about movies.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, to kind of just maybe wrap up, because you have so much
Not
Um,
wrap up the
no,
podcast,
oh
wrap
no,
up
no, no, no.
wrap up.
Wrap up about TikTok and social media.
We're
Uh,
halfway through our
I think
lunch, Larry.
right, right, right. I think one of the things about social media these days, and everybody who's on there is an expert or they know something about something, and most people just regurgitate information that they either hear or partially watch on the news, and they pick up on that. And I second that. The negativity sells more than the positive. But Nicholas, you do. And I think when you have something to say and something positive to give, a bit of information that people find um, different, and when they find that, they want that more and more and more. And I think with you, since you are at a level, you are at a level that people want to get to get, because obviously, when you
Mhm.
climb the ladder, right? um
Yeah.
you are right there, and I think it shows when you talk about things. It sounds like it's just as a matter of fact. It sounds like you just have information to give, and people actually learn something from you, which is absolutely amazing. So I appreciate that. um, and that
Thank
you
you.
care.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I do care. And that was another kind of reason is that I started talking about stuff is because you're right. I think the thing about being a writer is like you always have goals that you want to hit. Like before I was on the blacklist, my big goal was to get on the blacklist. And then I got on the blacklist, it opened all these doors for me, and I was like, now my goal is to write a studio movie. But every time you kind of hit the goal, you kind of go back to square one and you're like, now I need to hit this goal or whatever. But you're right. I have hit like a lot of goals that people want to hit, and I feel like I have advice that I can give. And I go to, I used to go to so many. I don't really have as much time anymore, but in general, like I would go to coffee with people who are more experienced than me when I was starting out, and they would give me a lot of good advice. And so I try to do that now. Or when people like USC students reach out to me a lot, and I'll say, hey, Lee, I can do a quick phone call and try to help you. But I was just like, this will be so much more efficient if I just get on here and talk about the things that I usually tell people, the advice that I give. People always want to hear about the blacklist script and like, how do you write a really buzzy script? And so I was like, okay, I'll put that all down so I can document this and people can kind of go through it and see these things. And, another thing is about what I do, and not to like say, like, I always make it clear, like, I don't think I know more than other people. I can tell you about my own experience. There's really no one way to do it, but I do feel confident in making people feel inspired to finish their projects, like to trying to encourage people on the emotional level. I feel confident in
Mm.
that, and that's the comment that I get the most is like your stuff makes me want to go write, which makes me really happy. Um, but I also a lot of the people in my position like offer screenwriting services, and so that's kind of like a sticky, controversial area. And, I don't want to say that it's completely unethical because, I know screenwriting professors. There is actually one guy, Tom Vaughn, he might be good for your podcast. I've been a huge fan of his Twitter for years. Like he's a proper screenwriting professor, and he's been writing professionally for like 28 years or something. And for years I was like, this guy's tweets are like so good. Like he's one of the good ones. And he just joined TikTok and he's getting
Oh,
crazy traction really fast. He has like 10,000 followers already. I keep like reposting his stuff. But he's an example of someone who's like an actual teacher. So when you have someone like that, I'm like, you know how to teach this craft. I trust someone like that. But there are a lot of people who are kind of at my level who charge for screenwriting meetings or like they'll help you figure out the story. And
Right.
I could never charge for something like that because it's just not my thing. It's not my brand, and I don't feel like I have the credentials um, to do something like that. And so I believe in sort of making this a free resource in the way that a podcast like Script Notes was one of my biggest screenwriting
love
free
that
resources.
podcast.
It's amazing. It's like the best. Yeah, I still listen to old episodes on repeat. And so, yeah, I think it's important because um, screenwriting does have that financial barrier to entry, and that's a huge problem. And so, yeah, I just feel like there should be more free resources out there for people. And I also get bombarded with people that are like, how much would you charge me to like do notes on my script? And I'm like, I can't read your script, can't do notes on it. But but yeah, no, so I believe in sort of being a free resource, and I will never unless I'm like a screenwriting professor or something, which someday I'll probably do. Other than that, I'm not going to take people's money. I'm not going to say, join my Patreon to learn how to actually write a script. Yeah, I try to be a resource as much as I can.
And
Wow.
you made a
Wow.
good point. And a lot of time, those people who say, take my course or pledge to my Patreon, they've made nothing. All they're doing is,
Mhm.
so now again, I learned more from DVD commentaries about filmmaking than I did in
Oh
film
yeah.
school. But a lot of those
Hmm.
people on, the YouTubers, they've never sold anything. They have no connections, but they're going to teach you how to write a screenplay. It's like they'll teach you formatting, which is important, but they don't
Yeah.
understand structure, conflict, and all of that. So this is two questions that connect as one. What got you
Hmm.
started? What was the inspiration to filmmaking, and where did you go to school?
So I've always been writing, like pretty much my entire life. Writing was always my favorite subject, so I kind of always knew that I was going to do something in writing. I was an English major at UCLA undergrad. Um, and at that point, I was like, ooh, maybe I'll be like an English teacher, or maybe I'll write novels. I was a student journalist, so I was like, maybe I'll cover, I would write movie reviews actually, which is kind of also what I do now. Not exactly reviews, but I talk about movies. Um, and then yeah, I took a couple years off to figure out what I wanted to do, and during that time, I ended up meeting a couple film students, and yeah, I kind of just started to think like, what if I applied to film school? And in film school in general, I feel like a lot of people, it's not worth it because you have to know what you want to get out of film school. You have to decide like, is this worth it for me? Is it worth it to spend the money and do this? I wasn't like a YouTube film kid. I didn't have a bunch of
Mm,
friends who were like, let's all go make a movie. I didn't know how to edit. I didn't know any of the technical stuff. Like all I knew is like I love writing. So film school, I was like, oh, this could be an option for me to learn a lot, and I did learn a lot. I was like, editing was like my secondary track. I was like one of the only. So I eventually went back to USC for film school to get my MFA, writing and directing. Directed a bunch of short films. Kind of reaffirmed that I'm still best at writing, though I do want to return to direct stuff. Um, but yeah, so then film school kind of USC is very much into creating I would say semi-competitive um, environment, and kind of like keep preparing you for the industry. Like they're big on that with their guests and all that kind of stuff. So the moment I got out, I was like really hungry. I had scripts ready, and I was like, I'm gonna take whatever assistant job I can get. Um, and I started just DMing people that I looked up to, like not the Ryan Murphys of the world, but like there, for example, there was a director, this guy Matt Spicer, who is a USC alumni. He came to visit one of our classes. He made a movie called Ingrid Goes West that I really loved.
Okay, I heard of it. Yeah,
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 it's really
Audrey
good. So,
Plaza, right? Yeah.
yeah. She wants to, she's like an influencer, and she was like, she kind of, yeah. But he visited one of our classes. And so there was people like that I would kind of just DM and be like, hey, like, can we get coffee? I'm coming out of USC. And usually alumni are like nice enough to do that. And so, yeah, opportunities like that, I got coffee with him, and he was like, hey, do you want to be my assistant?
Wow.
And so, yeah, I kind of had a couple assistant jobs that were all based on that. Just people I reached out to. I was like, I love your stuff. Can we talk? If there's any way to work together. And then, so I was an assistant for about a year and a half, maybe. And I was writing at the same time, had bosses who were nice enough to let me write on the job as long as I was getting all my work done. They knew I wanted to be a writer. And then, yeah, it was like October of 2019. Had this barren script that we sent out, me and my manager, and it just like made the rounds very quickly, got me an agent, got on the blacklist. And then I got an offer to go work at Sony Animation by February or March of 2020, pretty much exactly when lockdown was happening.
Wow.
And yeah, that was my first professional writing opportunity, got me off the assistant desk. And so just as the pandemic was really getting into full swing, I was working from home every day, working on this animated film that was mostly unaffected because animation can be done all remotely. Um, and yeah, that was the very first movie I ever worked on, and it's going to be coming out next year. It'll be the first
Wow.
project that
Awesome,
I
man.
that I will have actually come out. Yeah.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Wow.
I should have said it earlier.
Thank you.
Congratulations on all your success,
No, it's all
man.
good. Thank you.
Because
Wow.
you show that, there are a lot of people who say they're gonna do this one day but never do it. And it's, we say on the other podcast, it's living life without a net. And that's what you like
Mm.
the trapeze artists who perform without a net.
Mhm. Mhm.
What you're doing. You're working without a net, and that's awesome. So when we looked through your bio, it mentioned the Magic School Bus. Now, that show was way after my time. I'm only 27. No, I'm kidding. I'm way older than 27, but you wrote an adaptation of it. Tell us a little bit about that. And what the show act. I think you might know it because of Megan, Larry, but I have no clue what that show is.
Yeah, so Magic School Bus was a show that I grew up watching. It's sort of a children's educational cartoon. There's a character named Miss Frizzle who is this very eccentric science teacher who takes these her students on all these kinds of adventures, and it's very science forward, but it's also has this kind of magical element to it. There's a lot of famous episodes where the bus like shrinks down into microscopic form and like goes inside the human body, and you learn about that. So it's like kind of this like crazy kid show that is very weird, but was a huge part of like my childhood. So yeah, so that was an OWA. So OWA is like open writing assignment. So this is like there are different ways you can get hired on projects. Sometimes you can just write your own script and send it out and hope somebody buys it. And then other times there's IP, intellectual property. So it's like the studio owns this thing. There's an active search to figure out who's going to write this thing. So my agent calls me one day. He's like, "You're a millennial writer. I'm assuming you know Magic School Bus." And I was like, "I love Magic School Bus." And basically, yeah, the everybody. This was like the hottest sort of OWA in town. So often, and you don't get paid for this. So it's like you have to just go in, shoot your shot. I think my agent alone said he had like 7 people he submitted to
Whoa.
try to go write this movie. And so I would guess they call it a bake off kind of when there's a bunch of people all kind of in the competition for it. And so I would guess there was like a lot of writers who pitched on this. Um, and early on, yeah, I think part of it was like I went in. I think pitching is important because you are pitching your version. They give you basically no direction. There was like a little pitch deck, and like on the title page, it had like the bus in outer space, and then on the second page, the bus was like underwater. And I was like, "What kind of movie do you guys want?" And they're like, "We don't. It could be anything. It could be maybe it's outer space, maybe it's this." And so you have like no direction. You just have to go
Yeah.
in and just try stuff. And so I tried a lot of things, but a big part of my pitch also was the fact that my mom was a school teacher. And so when
Oh,
you're pitching a movie, you're not only convincing them that you have the best version, you're also convincing them that like emotionally you have the best way into that movie. So the whole front part of my pitch was about my mom kind of being the OG Miss Frizzle, and she was an elementary school
okay.
teacher. I cited like real weird, wacky science projects that she did and kind of tied it all into my life. And it's like, here's why I have a really big connection to this movie and why you should hire me. Um, so yeah, the version that I pitched was so I don't think I can talk about it that much, and I still don't know if it's going to get made, unfortunately. But
Okay.
I was brought in to do a page one rewrite. So basically, someone else they wouldn't show me the script. So early at some other point, someone had written a different version of the movie that I will never know about. I came in to do a complete overhaul, so I started from zero, and I had to do my own version of the movie. And originally they were like, "Oh, this is the version we like now. Like we're gonna send this out to directors," and I think they did. I don't know what's happening with it now. Nobody keeps the writer in the loop. But I pitched. Yeah, I was told like the original writer kind of did like a not boring, but like kind of just did like what you'd expect. And so I was like, okay, like I'm gonna pitch the crazy version that maybe you won't make, but you'll be like, that was crazy. That writer's so smart.
Yeah.
Um, and so I pitched a really kind of out there. I was trying to pitch like the Lord and Miller version. I was like, what is the really
Okay.
unique, surprising take on this material? And I also, my goal was to do, because I was like, this could be like a franchise. I wanted to do like an origin story for how Miss Frizzle became this, wacky like character. And so she kind of starts out as the weird teacher that nobody likes, and all the other teachers are kind of like, "You're a weirdo," and she kind of becomes the legendary Miss Frizzle
I
by
love
the end of
that.
it through this adventure. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was such a surreal experience to write that script because it was the first project I've ever worked on where I could go to Reddit because they had made the announcement. Elizabeth Banks is still
Oh,
attached to
wow.
be Miss
Oh,
Frizzle,
Wow.
geez.
and so. Yeah, and so it was the first time I could go see the news break on Reddit and read all the comments of people like, they're gonna mess this up. They better not do this. They better do this. And so I'm like writing the script while also reading all these Reddit comments.
Wow. That's cool.
And yeah, it was really cool because it's like a recognizable property, but at the same time, it's like, oh, people, if they get this wrong or I get this wrong, people will be like, you ruined my childhood.
Oh
Exactly.
Um,
God, I hate
Exactly.
when
yeah,
people do that.
Exactly.
Like the whole George Lucas horrible word you should never say to my childhood. Did you guys
yeah,
see that? That there was a song too. Oh, it was really
No,
yeah, a little
oh
bit.
upsetting,
Yeah.
God.
man. Really. But
Mm,
Nick, you're gonna make a great professor because you
Oh,
explained
thanks.
all those things you were saying like an open writing assignment because you're smart enough to know there's going to be people who don't work in the industry like us who have no clue what those things are. And thank you for doing that for our audience, man. I really appreciate that of you. When you were talking about the Magic School Bus thing, it reminded me. I normally work in teen horror movies. That's my go-to thing. But I
Oh, I
also,
love teen horror movies.
oh, you're going to enjoy Hillsborough Road at the end of the year. I'll get you a link. We'll get you a
Oh,
copy.
please. I'll
So,
talk about
but
it on TikTok. Yeah.
I also love family films. And when I was at Los Angeles Film School, I heard about the Nickelodeon Writers Program, where you can get a
Huh.
job on a Nick show. And I have
Oh,
nieces and nephews who really liked iCarly. And I wanted to get a job on it. Larry's already laughing because of the story I'm going to tell. I was outlining, because I'm a big outliner. We'll talk about that next, an
yep.
episode of iCarly, and I honestly thought this would get me a job on a kid show. I noticed that they never show the mom, so I wrote, I miss mom. And in my episode, you find out that Carly is in a coma, and in her comatose state, sees her mom. And then in the uncomatose state, Carly's in the hospital bed, and her friends are standing over her talking. And the
My
one character
God.
she hated, Neville, every time he talks, it sounds like a loud banging on the door. I thought that would get me a job on a kid show. I kind of wish I would have wrote it just so they can call me in. They yell at me. I go, were you high when you wrote this?
That is insane.
I
But
still
but
think it could
but
have worked.
yeah, but I feel like that could get you a different type of job, maybe not
mhm.
on the Nickelodeon show, but I've always loved like there's similar theories I've read about Rugrats. Like people have theories that like there's like a really dark alternate version of like you can read into for Rugrats and all that. But um, yeah, that's very dark. And but I feel like some people would like that for the right opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because
definitely for
of the,
sure.
did you see the Boy Meets World episode? And then there was Sean.
That is literally my favorite episode of television
Same
of all
with me.
time. I've seen it
Same
like a
with
thousand
me,
times.
dude. Dude.
It's
And you know
so
what's
that
crazy?
show is also like my favorite. Yeah.
Boy Meets
That
World.
that episode just happened. It wasn't part of Halloween week on TGIF. No, teen horror movies are popular. We'll get Jennifer Love Hewitt in the episode. We'll do a scary one. It's the best, one of the best teen episodes of a show ever. Like Dawson's Creek is my all-time favorite show. Kevin Williamson is my hero. It reminded me of the episode, The Scare on Dawson's Creek.
So I've never seen Dawson's Creek, but just the other day, I was talking to somebody and they were like, "Oh yeah, Kevin Williamson. Was he the creator or one of the
Yeah,
the
Hmm.
head
no,
writers on it?"
Creator,
100% the creator.
creator.
It's loosely based on his life.
So then I Googled it and it was like, "Oh yeah, you can find there's all these like horror episodes of Dawson's Creek in the show because Kevin Williamson obviously loves horror." And I was like, "Am I about to watch the entirety of Dawson's Creek right now just to see these? Or maybe I'll just watch the horror episodes first." But
You'll get addicted, my
yeah,
friend. Because
my parents used to be obsessed with that show.
I was a
Yeah.
teenager when it came out.
Hmm.
That was how I dressed, was like the characters on. I went from being a skate punk kid to a total
Yeah.
preppy.
Very true.
Do you
Very
think if
true.
if I'm like a Boy Meets World fanatic that I'll also love Dawson's Creek?
Uh, Boy Meets World is how parents wish their teens were. Dawson's Creek is how it really is. I mean, there's in the
Mhm.
second
Huh.
season, there's a character who deals with bipolar disorder. Joshua
Wow.
Jackson's dad absolutely hates him. It's crazy. So,
Wow.
what are some of your like favorite movies that inspired? Because we know you were doing the novels, but what movies, what
Hmm.
directors? You seem like you're a big oh my God, the guy who made Shaun of the Dead. What's his name? Why can't I
Oh,
think it?
Edgar Wright.
You seem like you'd be an Edgar Wright fan.
Yeah, I mean Scott Pilgrim is one of my favorite movies of all time. I've seen it maybe more than any other movie except for like Back to the Future 2, maybe, which is another one of my favorite movies. Um, when I was a kid, I would say there were two TV shows that are kind of tie into the teen horror thing that I still think inspires so much of my work, and it was Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark? Those were like, I mean, I still watch those episodes. Like, it's the nostalgia, but it's also yeah, like burned into my brain. I love that vibe. And R.L. Stein, that was like I read
I was
every R.L.
about to
Stein book
ask
as a
if you were
kid.
a Fear Street fan.
Oh,
Fear Street or
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and those were obviously scarier for a little more of a teen audience. Yeah, those were kind of a good bridge also to Stephen King because the Goosebumps, I've gone back to reread them and like I think Goosebumps is amazing. But if you reread them now, they're not as written. They're written much more basic compared to the Fear Street because they're for very young kids. Um, and I don't know that they quite hold up, but I do think Fear Street. I'm happy that Netflix is finally utilizing that property because
yeah,
I thought it was really cool when they did those three movies back to back.
it was awesome.
But yeah, yeah. But in general, yeah. So my dad would, me and my dad would watch a lot of movies when I was a kid, and my dad was, your classic dad. Like he would show me Die Hard on repeat, Top Gun, those sort of big, fun action movies that I still love. That was kind of my first like obsession with like rewatching movies over and over. And then yeah, horror has always been a huge thing for me. Um, and then I do comedy. So comedy, kind of the Edgar Wright stuff, the Scott Pilgrim, like anything that has that vibe, I'm a big fan of. And then yeah, Back to the Future, all of those movies. But for whatever reason, the second one, that was the movie that I rewatched like every day as a kid, and
Really?
I got to see it. Yeah, I just love the alternate reality take and kind of all that stuff. I got to see it at Alamo Drafthouse for the first time on the
That's
big screen like
awesome.
last year, and
That's
it was,
cool.
oh my God, it was yeah, it was like amazing. But yeah, like horror has always been kind of my thing, which is kind of funny because my career didn't really start in horror. It started in comedy, and it's always kind of been a point of discussion between me and my reps in terms of like, hey, I've got this like I did an R-rated comedy based on a comic book for Paramount. I did Magic School Bus, which is a family sort of fun adventure comedy. My Blacklist script was like a coming of age comedy. I've written other coming of age comedies, and so I kind of was always like, guys, I also like horror. And it was like, well, but you're on this list now. So
Oh,
keep
yeah.
working on these things, keep pitching those things. And so just this year, we're about to take it out soon, but I have like a horror script that is kind of one of those scripts where you talk to your team and you're like, we need to write such a good horror script that when people read this, it's going to get
They
me
onto
onto like
say
the
no.
horror
Yeah.
lists.
That's
Yeah.
awesome,
Yeah.
man. That's awesome.
So
Wow.
yeah, so
Wow.
I'm really excited for that. But yeah, and I think horror is probably the genre that I still keep up the most with. When I was an assistant, I worked for this guy named Nick Antosca, who he had a TV show that I was obsessed with called Channel Zero. It was the
Yes, I
creepypasta
just
TV
that this
show.
popped in. Yeah. I love the Candle Cove creepypasta so much. When I
So
saw
good.
the
It's so
TV
good.
show, I was geeking out the way you would if it was like a real property. Did you see the
Yeah.
short film version of it? Dude,
No.
it's
Was that
all
made by somebody else?
it's just a random dude on YouTube, but they took an angle instead of a message board, it's just people hanging out in a living room. So it's not the
Oh,
whole random people. I'll find it and I'll send it to you
please send
tonight.
that to me. Please send that to me. Yeah, so Nick was somebody that same thing, out of film school. I emailed a really quick DM on Instagram. Hey man, sorry to bother you. I'm getting out of USC. Channel Zero, I'm a big creepypasta person. I love that he was the first person to kind of figure out the Reddit rights. Like people were like, what is Reddit? How do we do the rights to this? And
Yeah.
a lot of people would just rip those stories off, not realizing you do have to have the rights. If you're just posting like a fan film on YouTube, you don't need it for that. But yeah, so I eventually got coffee with Nick, and it was the same thing. I was just like, I love Channel Zero, and he's like, I'm glad you like it, but the ratings aren't very good, and it's already canceled, and now I'm working on something else. And I think to this day, he talks about the show because it's so good, but it had a very small budget. And because of that, they let him be the showrunner and kind of let him do whatever he wanted. And in turn, it's such a weird show. Like I think the first two seasons are the best. The No End House season is maybe my favorite just because it's really creepy and really beautiful. But yeah, each season it was very almost like auteur television. Like each season has one director, and it was usually like a brand new director. Um, Arkasha, who directed the Butcher's Block season, which was the weirdest season, she just directed First Omen. It was her first debut feature. So there's a
Wow.
lot of people who kind of got their start on Channel Zero with Nick. Um, but I can't remember what the original question was. I just ended up talking about how much I love Channel Zero.
Actually, since hearing about like your love of like genres and film, um, what's it like for you right now, being on the inside, looking out at, and just like kind of like what you said, and for better or worse, there's politics involved in Hollywood. We all know that. We all understand that. And I don't and see, this is where Eric and we're kind of like on the outside looking in, right? Yes, you can be indie, you can make a film, you can do this, you
I
can do
hate
that.
being indie. I want to sell out as quick. That's why I work in the most commercial genre possible.
Well, and
Yeah, horror. Good genre to
how
be in.
how do you cross over into that, and then being on the inside, kind of knowing, kind of like what we're talking about the politics of it, and understanding now why things get canceled, why
Mm,
shows don't go or move forward, or even being
hmm
a writer, right? Writing scripts, and they
hmm
just kind of get, kind of set aside just for a minute and then kind of forgotten. What's that like for you at this point in your life, and really in your career right now?
hmm Yeah, no, I mean it's a roller coaster. And I think the longer I've only been doing this. I mean, I've been writing scripts for a really, really long time and writing stuff my whole life. But from 2020, so coming up on about 5 years of doing this full time professionally, coming from like the Sony thing and then moving into live action. And there's been already in that short amount of time, so many waves. When I initially broke in, I had this huge wave of, you don't get to celebrate a lot of things as a writer. So getting on the blacklist, especially when you have a buzzy script that people like, there was like Forbes articles. So I wrote the script about Barron Trump sabotaging his dad's election, and it's a fun coming of age comedy, and it's just controversial enough to kind of get people mad at me, but in a good way. But there was like Forbes articles. talking about is Nicolas Curcio going to be sued? There was like a lot of articles using it as kind of clickbait, like, oh, the Barron Trump
Oh
script,
yeah.
like he wrote about this kid. But even though it's like if you read the script, it's like it's a very kind of fictional take on reality, and Barron is also positioned as like the hero of the story. He's just a kid who doesn't want to be in the spotlight, essentially. Um,
If I'm a
but
studio, I buy that and I tell you first, change the names and I'll buy it.
It's interesting. There over the years, people have tried different, like people have talked about, could we do this in a animated satirical way, kind of a South Park vibe? Could we fold this into like Richie Rich as IP? Maybe someday. Someday people still read that script and love it. By the way, I put that up on my TikTok because the blacklist scripts usually get circulated anyway. So I do have that up for people to read. Um,
Cool.
but uh, but yeah, I think that the biggest thing is yeah. So like I broke in this huge wave of like, oh my God, people writing articles about me and just so many meetings and kind of feeling like you're the brand new fresh person who's like really important. And I think back about the Sony job and it's like I've pitched on so many movies in the last 5 years, board games, video games, candy, like Peeps Marshmallow movies, so much stuff. And it's very, very hard you have to pitch and really not beg, but the amount of work you have to do for free to get a job is crazy. And when I broke in, I was having this moment, and Sony was like, we need somebody right now, and it's you. Like I told them what I would do with the movie, but it was like they knew that they just loved my script and it was this new writer having a moment. We UTA, they're like, we just signed this guy, and yeah, and then I went on to do a bunch of stuff, and then I learned that like I thought there was something wrong with me because I was like, wait a minute, I pitch on all this IP and I get jobs, and I'm doing great, and then I would pitch on jobs where either I didn't get hired or nobody got hired. So like there was a really big video game property that took me the whole thing took me like 11 months, like not working nonstop every day, but like I was trying to
Well,
get this job for 11 months and I got to the final two and then I didn't get it. And I've had board games and video games and like the Monopoly movie, all this stuff that just gets circulated and it's like writers are always pitching on it. But I was like, what's wrong with me here? I went a year and I didn't get anything. And then the writer's strike happened, and I met all these other writers, and I met these TV writers who were on like not like The Bear, but like whatever The Bear was 10 years ago, like these really hot shows. And to hear people say, "Oh yeah, like I wasn't in a room for 3 years after that," that's normal. That's totally normal. And so I had this moment. I think the strike, even though there was so much like, "Oh my God, this is going to destroy the momentum of so many people's careers and going to kill projects," that pause and like moment of, "Oh no." It really did teach me, and just hearing from so many more experienced writers who are older, who are like, no, 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 like your career will have waves and people do have ebbs and flows. And it's just
Yeah.
the type of career where you're going to see a lot of your friends give up and some of them are forced out of it. Like I have, I don't have any kids, so I have a cat and she's going to be fine. So like, but I do have friends that are like, I can't do this anymore. Like I need to go get a regular, real job to make money for my family. And so you start to understand, oh, it is a really tough industry that forces a lot of people out who can't live this lifestyle of making a lot of money and then making no money for a long time, but still having to work every day on the clock for free and pitch on stuff and take meetings. It's very unstable and it's always been that way. But when you were talking about kind of like seeing the politics and stuff, it's the reason why, yeah, like I don't give movies ratings on Letterboxd like I used to. And now I just give it like 5 stars and a heart if I love the movie because it's just I hear people and look, I think criticism and whenever I talk about this on TikTok, people are like, "Oh, how are movies supposed to get better if we can't criticize them?" Critics are like that's a very I think it's great. Movie critics, like I have critics that I follow and I love reading their reviews. And even though we have situations like Madam Web where I feel like it's unfair because critics often don't understand why the movie is that way.
Chris Stuckman
Like,
did nothing
yeah,
wrong. Justice for Chris Stuckman.
thank you. Thank you. And by the way, I'm so excited for Chris Suckman's found footage
So
horror film this
excited.
year.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, to see that guy come up on YouTube and now have this movie come out with Neon and have Mike Flanagan EP it. I know it's his hero like years ago, but even before the movie got announced, I was at an industry Halloween party and I ended up meeting Stuckman's manager and he told
Oh,
me
wow.
that Stuckman had made this great film and that Mike Flanagan was going to EP it. I almost like cried. And it wasn't just because I was drinking. Like I was like, oh my God, Chris Stuckman, I love that guy so much. I know he wanted to make movies. But anyway, you start to see, oh, this is what happens to movies. Like you look at a movie like The Flash, and it's easy for people to say, like, here's what sucks and all these different things. But then it's like, I heard that there were like 100 writers who worked on a Flash script over a number of decades.
Yeah,
So you have to consider like it is not as easy as like, well, the intro didn't make any sense. It's like you have to think about how many drafts there were and how many writers there were. And, there was also something with the Madam Web where I think somebody looked at the screenwriters whose names were listed and they were like, look at all these terrible films that these guys have written. And it's like, also, sometimes screenwriters didn't even write the things you're reading. Like there are people who get paid a lot of money to come in
exactly.
uncredited, even on the day of, and rewrite the script like from scratch because the studio is suddenly like feeling scared about it. So I think, and people confuse when I say this, they're like, well, we need to be able to critique films to make the studios have better art. And it's like, I totally agree. It's just I'm not a critic. So when I'm going to South by Southwest because of TikTok, which I'm so happy.
That's
It's
so
my
cool,
first big
man.
festival, super excited. And I have like a press badge, but like I'm just a guy who just loves talking about movies on TikTok. And yeah, like every time I talk about a movie, usually like the producer of that movie or somebody like DMs me and is like, "Oh,
Wow.
cool, yeah, let's do a
That's
general
so
meeting or something."
awesome.
So yeah, so I don't talk badly about movies because usually I'm going to end up meeting with those people anyway, and I usually can find something that I like about most movies, especially horror films, and I think that's something I love, which I'm sure you know too, Eric, about the horror genre and horror fans is not saying we love watching garbage, but like I mean, I have an old VHS TV in my room with Roku set up, and it's like I'll go
Same.
on Tubi and throw in some 80s terrible movie that no one's heard of that's some weird slasher, and it's just fun to watch. And I think that's
Yeah.
why horror is so cool. And like there are like horror fans, modern horror fans who are like Hereditary's not scary or like I hate long legs, but in general, like horror fans, we just love watching this stuff. Um, it's fun.
Well, in
Yeah.
my belief as a horror, as someone who mainly works in horror, a rising tide lifts all ships. Like the fact that
Mm,
Heart Eyes did good is going to help the thing I'm writing right now in my movie that's coming out this year because slashers are popular. And again, the great thing about horror is something like Hereditary is awesome, but so is Sleepaway Camp 2,
hmm.
those two opposite ends. So here's a question I love asking all my fellow writers. I am a huge outliner, and a lot of it is because I read Save the Cat, which I love that book. So my
So do I.
scripts always start with pen and paper outline and character bios, index card outline, back to a paper and pen, which is now my iPad, and then I finally start final draft. What's your writing process?
So yeah, I'm glad you asked. So when I first started out, I was so desperate to just like write as much as I could that my thought process was literally there's no time to outline. Like I'm just gonna dive into the script and I'm just gonna figure it out and I'm gonna finish it. And then usually I would be able to finish a draft based off my enthusiasm, but I would have to basically break the entire script down and then outline it after a misguided first draft. So I think the longer I do this, and I think a lot of it is also the engineering point that you mentioned before, and it's like the math of screenwriting. Again, you have so many famous novelists that I love, Stephen King, Bret Easton Ellis, who admit that you can kind of just find your way through a novel because so much of a novel is like you can have entire thousands of word chapters that are just kind of like one scene, one
Yeah,
moment extended. Like it is a stream of consciousness, but there's also a reason why when you adapt a novel for film, especially a Stephen King novel, let's throw away the first couple hundred pages of needless setup. Like
and fix the damn
screenplays
ending.
have to be efficient. Yes, screenplays have to be have to be really efficient. And so yes, so something like Save the Cat, which is also something I've come around on because I know that it's so popular for people to be like, Save the Cat is the most harmful thing that's ever existed in screenwriting. And honestly, I think some of that is like very gatekeepery, and it's like people don't like that Save the Cat has provided an easy to understand formula to someone who's coming in from the outside. And guess what? I know professional screenwriters who are really successful who still use the Save the Cat beats. And for usually when I'm starting, like sometimes you kind of have to shift and change and
Yeah.
adjust it to your movie. But like if I'm starting from scratch, I use the Save the Cat beats. And it's so funny because yeah, like I think all writers have this moment where it's the first thing you read because everyone says you got to read this. Then you learn that everyone else hates this thing because they're like, oh, it teaches you how to be formulaic and on this page and this page. And as much as, yeah, on TikTok, I say you don't have to obey these rules of like this, Blake Snyder is very strict about like this has to happen on this page. And I don't necessarily go that far, but I think in general, his outline and structure of like, here are the beats of most commercial films. If you want to write commercial films, it's extremely helpful. And you can always start with that structure and change it and break it apart and do things differently. And you can do Barbarian, which is a film that I love, which kind of has this like it totally begins like a new movie at the first act break. And so I think the more I do this, the more I 100% believe in outlining. And yeah, but I also think it's normal for new writers to just be like, no, I'm going to feel my way through this. I'm going to figure it out. Um, and people think that if they outline, they're like, it's like, well, now I have nothing to create or invent on the spot. But you can always just diverge from your outline,
Yeah.
And I think even if your outline is simple, like I love, like, even if it's just the five big moments, like what is your setup, inciting, first act break, midpoint, low point, climax, or whatever. Like it doesn't have to be sheets and sheets and sheets of paper. It can be, but like you should know the big points of your movie because yeah, it's just going to be so much more efficient moving through. So screenplays are not that long. Like when you're on page 10, around there, something needs to start happening and it's going to build to something around page 90, 100. Like screenplays are very short compared to books and other mediums. So it's a very efficient format and I think it demands at least some form of outlining. And if you don't outline, you're just going to end up outlining on the second draft because you're going to realize, you're kind of just making it up.
Mm,
All right. I have one
At least
comment.
that's what I think.
I'll let you
yeah.
ask your
Yeah.
question. Like with me, my short film, The Percipient, the first thing people put money in, there's a character in it who's a blind psychic. I didn't know she was a blind psychic till my second go at the outline. It just dawned on me, hey, wouldn't it be crazy if I did this? And that's what helped, get the script attention and people put money into it. Right? Go on, Larry.
I was just this is all fascinating because I'm not a writer and I wish I was. Same
No, you
reason
don't.
because
Oh.
well here's the thing
The
and here
happiest
here
people in the world, most emotionally well balanced people on the planet.
right. But the reason I say that is the same reason that when I was acting, right, and doing the acting thing, um, I wish I had become a filmmaker earlier in that process because the one thing that drove me crazy, and you kind of said this too, is as an actor, you do get to a certain point where as you're just starting out as an actor, you do commercials, and every commercial you book, right? You go, you shoot, it's absolutely awesome. The next day, you're right back into the queue for auditioning, and you really, as an actor, you have to wait for people to cast you. Whereas when you're a filmmaker, see, even talking to you, Nicholas, and hearing your story, I thought filmmaking and I thought acting was hard. Oh my God. Being a screenwriter and in the pipeline, it is. Actually, it is a blessing and a curse, right? You get to write and you get to do what you do, especially at your level, but then you have to, even at your level, and I mean, it is what it is. You have to wait. You have to wait, and it's a waiting game. But it's fascinating to me because as an actor doing the filmmaking, directing, and editing and all that, it helped me be a better actor, knowing like filmmaking, like what a director and the shots and the setup. So my question is, when you got into film school, because you started out as a writer, right? How
Mhm.
much did how much did or didn't the directing aspect and then the editing aspect help with making your writing more well-rounded or better?
Yeah, I think it was incredibly helpful. I mean, one of the things that I loved most about directing was working with actors. And, back to like even to what you said, I think you're right in that like when you're alone and you're in a room, you can practice your craft of writing, where directing, you kind of have to go find those roles and stuff. But it's also like auditions are like those suck. And even like I had some great directing professors, and a lot of the stuff was like, how do you handle actors? What's the etiquette? But he, from the get-go, he was like, auditions are awkward. They suck. In an ideal world, this wouldn't be a thing because it does feel very not unethical, but like it's like inhumane. It's like somebody walks in, they do the thing. It's like, all right, thanks, bye. And it's like 2 seconds, and it's like everybody's awkward and nervous, and it's even in a film school setting, it's just it sucks. It's like pitching. It's like this awkward performance you have to do, and you might not even be right for the project anyway. So, but yeah, in film school, working with actors, especially on my thesis film, I had these incredible actors. That was one of my favorite parts, and that is, I think, what draws me back to wanting to eventually direct some of my own, smaller genre horror scripts, is because I think about, oh, I could get this person, this would be great. But editing was probably the most helpful thing for my writing, because editing kind of is writing. It's kind of the final stage of writing. As you edit the pieces of the film, you're kind of retelling the story in its clearest form. Even the way I was thinking about making a TikTok about this, even the way that I edit a TikTok video, it kind of has elements of writing and like film editing in it.
Mhm.
So usually what I'll do is I'll just turn on the camera and just like yap, just talk about here's what I want to talk about. When I have like a really succinct 60-second video, there's probably like 2 or 3 minutes of footage, and I kind of go in and I kind of rewrite what I want to say by pulling the right clips. So
Yeah.
there's kind of an element in it. It's the same as writing. It's like you kind of just have to write a bunch of nonsense and be like, okay, step back. What do I actually want to say here? Oh, that's really good. And then that leads to the second point. And then this is my big kind of thesis statement that I'm making. So editing, yeah, editing is like, if anybody has the chance to edit who's a writer, I think those things really play off one another in a huge way. Um, Granted, like maybe I shouldn't have edited my own thesis film, because I think I made some decisions that were based on like emotions, and somebody else probably could have edited a better version of my movie. But yeah, no, film school, it was great. I loved it. I had a lot of classmates who didn't seem to like it. There were people who dropped out. There were people who aren't really doing anything anymore. I think you have to have the right attitude. You have to want to be in a learning environment. Kind of understand that you're here for a reason. You're here to learn. You're here to try things, fail. Um, but also just like having the schedule of like I was so busy in film school, but I was so productive because I was like
Wow.
scared of I wanted to be a writer after film school. So I was writing scripts during film school.
Mm.
Ironically, like I thought my thesis film would be the thing that would give me managers, agents. No one on any of my team has ever even seen my thesis film because it's not good. But the script that I wrote for free during film school that I submitted to Nickel, and it's like a lot of other writing students at USC, like if you're a writing student, technically you're paying to just write scripts, which is I have mixed feelings on that. But yeah, I wrote a nickel script and submitted it to that competition, and that was the thing that got me my manager. And I got to like quarterfinals, and that was the thing that kind of first launched me before the blacklist stuff happened. And so it ended up being the stuff that I wasn't even making in film school. Like it was just the stuff that I was writing on the side while neglecting my classes that ended up helping me. But it's all part of the experience. And people often ask like, should I go to film school? And I'm like, Probably not because it's expensive and it depends what you're looking for. For some people, it can be really helpful, really encouraging, especially if you just want to create a community of people that are going to be your collaborators and you don't really know anybody who's in film. Then it can be amazing. But if you go in with a bad attitude, you don't want to collaborate with people, you don't want to take instruction from teachers, it's probably, just a waste of money.
Yeah, yeah. How
So,
much?
oh, oh, well,
Really quickly, Eric.
last question,
Um,
Larry.
uh, what? No. Here's what I want to ask: Is
It's
do
the final
you?
question. Make it good.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Uh, okay.
no
Hang
pressure.
on. No. Then this is how much. This might be a good last question. Then, um, do you find that you're still learning? Are you always learning, even at this level? And more importantly, should you be learning at this level still?
Absolutely, yeah. I think I was just editing a TikTok this morning that is kind of a long story about one of the it was kind of the one that got away project, and it was a project that I thought was this dream opportunity, and it ended very, very badly. So I was kind of making this story that was just kind of about, I don't name names or anything, but it was kind of this story about how every project that you take on you will find new ways that you can be hurt, like emotionally and just in terms of your career, and like you'll also find the things that work. But it's like it's kind of the same with writing. Like you think you know how it works, but then every new project you're like, how does this work again? And even out of so many projects that I've pitched on, like the process is always a little different. Like it's kind of the same, but it's also so contingent on the people you're working with. Like I have this comedy pitch I'm working on right now, and it's based on the life of this comedian. So like instead of doing what I think is best for the story, I kind of went in and was like, well, let me look up this comedian's Wikipedia. What are the things from his real life that are actually really important to him? And like let me try to make the story in that way because this is kind of not really a biopic, but like based on this person's life. And so and then I did the pitch for him, and he was like, "I don't really like that, but maybe we could do this." So I was like, "Great, it's your
Oh,
movie, it's your life.
wow.
I will do, yeah. If you want that version, I'll pivot and do that version." So it's like, whereas if it's a story that's really personal to me, then I'd probably push back and say, "Well, here's why I think my version is the way to go." So
Hmm.
it's yeah, like every project is totally different. I always feel like I'm learning. And I feel like even 20 years from now, when we'll do part two of this podcast,
Yes.
like I'll probably still be learning and I'll probably still be like, and it's kind of like, William Goldman, there's the famous expression, nobody knows anything about the film industry, is because it's like an unknowable industry. Like,
Yeah.
especially with how fast things change and whether it's studio mandates or AI or like mini writers' rooms, like these things just change so fast
Hmm.
in an industry that's usually slow. So it's like you never really get to learn how things work, even if you're working. Uh, yeah,
Wow, you always have to evolve. And I maybe that's the point
exactly.
too, is you have to evolve. And man, Eric, are you sure? Do we really have to wrap up?
It's
I got one more
No,
question.
I got a little more time. Yeah, keep going.
Well,
Yeah,
okay. One
well,
more question, Larry.
well, well,
yeah.
that's a slippery slope. No, how much? Because uh, how much of your how do I put this? Because as an actor, right, you put so much into an audition, into not necessarily like getting a job. That's probably the easy part. And then you're working with the director and all that stuff. But as an actor, it's very emotional because you go in and you're so raw, right? And
Mhm,
I guess when you do a pitch, when you put something together, obviously this is your passion. And
mhm,
and um and if anybody's taking this the wrong way, I hope not, because I mean, I think to me, this is like industry professionals at different levels,
mhm,
and this is the way it is. And
mhm.
because I I see people on TikTok and they're like all making all these comments and stuff. But it's like when you go in and you go right and you go in for a pitch, how emotionally involved are you? And then is it easy for you to detach yourself from that pitch if it doesn't go well? Obviously, if it goes well, you're like, hey, this is great, this is awesome. Because I think too, for any of our like entertainment podcasts, I always want people that listen, like to get an
Mhm.
inside view of what they can expect, right? Because everything's
Mhm.
not wine and roses. It's not like Entertainment Tonight, right? This is a real world view of what it takes to be in an industry, like you said, that is ever changing. And how do they deal with that? And most importantly, how do you deal with that? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is how emotionally involved are you, and how do
Mhm.
you detach yourself away from that emotional involvement once that process is over?
Yeah, I mean, writing is definitely an emotional thing because you kind of have to like live in the emotions of the story and the movie. On like a broad macro level, I think early in my career, I would get my feelings hurt by feedback, and I would also get mad. Like people would be like, "This just doesn't work," and it's like, "Well, why don't you try it? It's really like you go do something better." Um, Whereas now, and I do think there's for sure like an etiquette to like how you give someone notes and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I've been at this point in my career, I've been in meetings where people just flat out so clear that they don't like what I did. And I think you have to view it in a certain perspective, which is like I think when what I love is when people don't like movies and they say it's not for me, because when you say that, it acknowledges like it's yeah, but also it acknowledges like it's okay that this is not the right movie for me. Like there's someone out there who probably like this, and that's all the film industry is. It's like, is this the right version for you? Because again, like a film like Barbarian or something, films that go on to be critically loved, Barbarian got like they said it got 200 passes over many, many years from almost every horror production company in town. A24 passed, Neon passed, everybody passed. And so all it like when you finally get that one person who says yes, it's like, wait, why did everyone pass? And it's like it's hard to say. But going back to the emotion thing, yes, it that's why this is so hard, is because to pitch a movie, you do kind of have to be emotional. Like I'm telling a story and I'm trying to perform it as much as I can, and I'm trying to be emotional, and I'm trying to get you cry if it's a sad story and has that component. So it's like it is very hard, and I think you just have to approach it in terms of like what are the projects that are detached and what are the ones that are really special. So if I get brought in to pitch on a board game or a candy bar or something, that is like, I'll do this. I need to get a job. If you don't like it, great. I don't like it either. Stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I have, and then there's other projects like I'm actually doing a meeting this Friday for it, but there's a
Good
biopic
luck.
about a musician that I love. Thank you. There's a musician that I love, and literally I wrote a biopic about the musician when this person's in high school. It's like a coming of age music biopic,
Wow.
and I wrote that in film school. And over the years, I've written a million drafts of it. And then just recently, I was making a TikTok about Complete Unknown, and I was
Great
like, "Oh, I
movie.
love biopics. I wrote this biopic about this other person a really long time ago." And then these producers reached out to me and they're like, "Can we read that script? Can we read that script?"
Whoa.
Oh my
So I was like, "Yeah,
God.
let me like polish it up.
Wow.
It's been a while." So I polished it, sent to this producer. We're gonna meet on it. And then that producer
Wow.
is like, "You're never gonna believe this, but I am working with this director right now. I think he would be good for the script." And I was like, dude, that is like literally the perfect director for that script. So we're going to try to figure it
Whoa.
out, try to make it work. But like, that's an example of something that is, even though it's about somebody that I've never met, it's about this musician who's dead now. That is one of my most personal stories. And I've always been very protective of that. And I think that's the one that's like, oh yeah, this has the capability of like breaking me. If I got screwed over on this
Yeah.
project, that would hurt really badly. So yeah, I think it's like there are some projects where you tell yourself, I'm in detached mode. This is my job. This is work. And then there's other ones where it's like going into a relationship. It's like, oh,
Hmm.
this will break me probably, but like, what am I going to do? Not go into this relationship?
Right.
It's just that's a part of life, you know. So
Yeah.
it's, you know, writing is very emotional and telling stories is very emotional, and I think you kind of just have to acknowledge that there, especially like, yeah, being a writer is like one of the hardest things you can do.
No
Acting is
doubt.
hard it's all hard in the film
It's
industry,
yeah.
and there's
Yeah.
so much heartbreak even
Yeah.
as a part of success.
And
Since
maybe
we've been
maybe
talking, oh, sorry, go
oh
ahead.
there I
We've
just
been
can't.
We've been talking about pitching so much. I got to talk about this. My
Yeah.
favorite day in film school was in screenwriting class when you would pitch your movie. Some people would pitch their thesis movie, and others
Hmm.
would pitch, the script they're going to go out in the town with. And now, again, I've always looked at like filmmaking as, like I said, 51% science, or what did I say? Engineering, 49%
Yeah.
art. And there would
Hmm.
be these people, their spec script would be these $200 million, $500 million epic sci-fi movies that are not based on an IP that they think a studio is going to go, hey, you know what? This writer who's never done anything, this script that's not based on anything, yeah, we're going to invest $1 billion into it. And I would be pitching these grounded, well, more boring compared to their sci-fi movies. And that's why I love pitching. I love watching people pitch movies on YouTube. Like Max Landis was one of the best at pitching movies, man. He could
Hmm.
pull you into anything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, pitching is, I mean, you talk about something that you're constantly learning and never really gets easier. Like pitching is the hardest part about screenwriting, and because it's like a different set of skills. Like writers are not actors for the most part. So it doesn't really make sense that writers are expected to act out the movie. And you know, people always talk about how a few decades ago, pitching a movie, it was like 5 or 10 minutes. Like it was very broad and brief. And it was like, great, go write your movie. And, you know, here is a bunch of like cocaine to go, you know, get you through the draft. Now it's like
Jumping on the
pitches are
table like in
so,
the player.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. But nowadays, pitches, I was just talking to a producer about this. Pitches have become so extensive. Like I think the Magic School Bus was probably my longest pitch. That was like a 25-minute pitch. And so when you have a 25-minute, which is really long, probably too long, 20
Uh,
minutes, 15, 20 minutes is like more in the ballpark. But people like you try to give a broad strokes pitch and the studio wants to know details. They're like, well, what about this? What about this? And they end up making you expand it out so much that you're by the end of it, it's like that's why you used to be able to just walk into an office and wing it. And nowadays, or at least on Zoom, writers will read off your pitch because that document is like it's really long. It's a you know it's a 8 page document and it outlines the entire movie, and
uh,
it's just harder to sell a movie now, so it's you know harder to pitch, and you have to really have every little thing mapped out. And so you can write your pitch in a conversational way so that it doesn't sound like you're reading, which is something that I do. But in general, it's really, really hard. And Zoom, the plus side is I get to read my pitch off the screen, and no one in theory knows I'm doing that. The negative is like, how do you keep someone's attention on a screen? How do
yeah.
you make sure that the exec isn't just browsing on a window? You
Right.
can, you know, sometimes I'll show pictures, which causes it's a whole nother like tech thing you can do. But you didn't used to have to show pictures when you pitched a movie, like, but now it's just a way to kind of try to keep engagement and have people visualize the movie in their head because they're just sitting on their computer. Um, because yeah, like sometimes, like I think I did a Disney pitch a couple years ago. They wanted to do in person still. Netflix, I did a comedy pitch last year, and we wanted people to laugh in the room, so we did it in person. But for the most part, people do pitches on Zoom now, and it's hard, especially when it's a comedy and people will mute themselves, so you can't hear the laughs. And
It
it's
all
like, I hope they're laughing,
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like I just have my own picture up so I don't get unfocused.
Right.
And yeah, pitching on Zoom for like 20, 25 minutes straight, it's
That's
hard.
nuts.
I get
That's
Do you
nervous before every
nuts.
guys,
pitch. It's
uh,
really,
Yeah.
really hard.
do you guys remember the Leave It to Beaver movie
Leave
in
It
the
to Beaver
90s?
movie? I
Yeah,
think
I don't
so.
because,
know that I saw the movie. I
well,
saw the
first,
show.
the
Yeah.
guy who played Michael Myers directed that, but when the screenwriter was going around pitching it, in the middle of the pitch, there would be a knock on the door, and the mom from Leave It to Beaver, the
That's cool.
original show, would
That's
come
cool.
in and give the studio people milk and cookies.
That's freaking cool. That's
And what was
cool.
it?
That's pretty awesome.
That's
Blake
cool.
Snyder talked about when he wrote Atomic Family, he would send the
Mhm.
script out and a fake atomic bombshell to all the studios.
That's cool. That's cool.
That's really fun. Yeah, the Final Destination writers, I think it was a Zoom pitch. There's an article about it somewhere. So the guys who are doing the new Final Destination
Bloodline,
movie
can't wait.
that I think comes out this year. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, they did it on Zoom. I can't remember if if the video was available or not. They did it on Zoom, and at the end of their pitch, they had something crazy happen where like something fell off the mantle and like decapitated them.
that's
So they had
awesome.
it
God.
pre-recorded. And it's like, yeah, those are the things where it's like, I don't know that those gimmicks will like get you the job, but it can definitely be like, oh yeah, 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 you know.
It'll
Yeah.
make you remembered, which is the most
Exactly.
important thing there is. Because if you're not right for that, you'll be right for the next one, because they'll
Yeah.
remember, hey, that
Exactly.
guy
Yeah.
who at least had the guts to try something. Let's
Yeah.
bring him back for this. Well,
Hmm.
again,
Yep.
Nick, this was an absolute
No,
blast.
no, no. We
And
could be on here
do,
forever.
do not
Nick, we
hang
got to
up
have you back.
after
This
we
is great.
after we
Yeah.
stop this because we just want to do a wrap up. And
Yeah,
there's something as we were talking that I think it would be fun to do with you on another episode. So
sure.
everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. All of Nick's links will be in the description. And again, Nick, thank you so much for having lunch with us.